All right, our Hangout is live. This is our help session. It's the 15th of October, 2015, and we'll go ahead and get started here. We haven't had anyone join via webcam just yet, but if they do, of course, I did, and that was also from our friend Malte Beckman. His question is, let's see here. Sorry for the delay here. Okay, his question. Shotgun mic is attached to a handheld recording device with an XLR cable, scooping the sound from below the talent. Would you recommend a shock mount when holding the mic, or can you just hold the mic directly? Well, it depends on the mic. Some are a little bit more sensitive to handling noise than others. Ideally, of course, you would use a shock mount of some sort. They do have the pistol grip shock mounts, which are just sort of a handheld thing, and it just has a suspension system for the microphone. That's ideal, of course, but I understand when you're trying to travel light, sometimes you prefer not to have that if you can avoid it. I have, on one occasion, I did hand hold a mic. In that particular case, I believe it's a Rode NTG2, and I did get some handling noise. So your experience may differ depending on the type of mic you're using and how steady a holder you are. It wasn't unusable when I did that. I still ended up having to use that audio, and it worked okay. Did have to do a fair bit more post-production cleanup work, though. So, Malte, that's a good question. And I would do some practice first before you do any projects. So if you're going to attempt that, definitely give it some practice first. And thank you for that question. All right. Let's see here. Let me spend a little bit of time talking about another thing that's kind of come up. I recently released the episode for this week on my YouTube channel was about it was a review of the Sennheiser AVX wireless system. And in this particular case, we had the kit with the MKE2 lavalier microphone. One kind of theme of the comments so far that have come up is, gosh, I'm hearing some noise. And I think the term most people are using is there's a noise floor. And that actually got me to thinking, and I have a question that I don't think feel like I've answered for myself just yet. And I need to ask somebody else. But my question is, when you use the term noise floor, typically is that referring to any sort of noise, that's any sort of audible noise, and potentially self noise from microphones and recorders that's captured in a recording that you don't want in your recording? Or does noise floor refer specifically to sound that's not actually there? It's not ambiance, but it's actually interference, or not interference, but it's in the signal, but it's created by the self noise, or it's generated as self noise from the microphone or recorder. And I need to kind of get to the bottom of that. I'm not sure what the answer is, so I'm asking the question. But I think in some cases, people are using the term noise floor to refer to even ambient sound and noise. And I'm not sure that's right. Maybe it is right. And maybe I've just kind of been assuming that term meant specifically self noise generated by the microphone and or recorder. So that's an outstanding item. I don't have the answer to that just yet. But for me, that's one that I'll be pursuing a little bit here. I'm also kind of curious what people are interested in learning about next. I've been grappling with hiding lavalier mics, and I still don't feel like I have a really solid set of tips that I can really share. Of course, I've used moleskin, which is sort of this felt type material that you can buy at most drugstores. And it has tape on one side, and it's sort of like a felt on the other side. It's typically used for helping your foot wounds to heal. So if you get a blister on your foot, you normally adhere this to the blister, and then it won't rub inside your shoe and has a chance for the blister to heal. But a lot of people have for many years used those on lavalier microphones to help hide them. And what they do is they just tape that over the capsule or the body of the microphone. And then in the theory, if the clothes run up against that moleskin, It should be a smooth enough surface that you won't get a lot of it, sort of abrasive noise, I guess. But I don't know. When I tried it in the past, it didn't work all that well. But I think it's time for me to give that another try and kind of dive in a little bit more depth and see how that goes. I also have I finally got in some toupee tape or wig tape. Some people use that as well. And I did some experiment in the help session attempt hiding it underneath the collar on a sort of a button-down, sort of business button-down shirt. And it was nice in terms of it didn't have any sort of clothing noise. There wasn't a lot of abrasion or any of that kind of noise that you get that was picked up by the microphone. The problem is that the mic didn't sound good. The collar actually blocked evidently a lot of the different frequencies. And so the voice sounded very kind of hollow, really, I guess. So that didn't pan out all that well. Some people hide in the hair, although that's not foolproof either. In fact, I just had someone contact me who is a wedding videographer. She had planted a mic in one of her talents. Her talent had a big braid and hid the mic in the braid. That resulted in all sorts of noise. It was totally unusable. So there are a lot of challenges with hiding microphones. And I have heard of people hiding microphones in people's hair, kind of at the hairline on the top of their forehead. And in fact, that's a pretty good place in terms of picking up the voice. But that only works for people that have quite a bit of hair up here. And for a lot of men, I'm not sure how well that would work. For women, it's probably a little bit more of a viable option. So still kind of working through that. But I'm kind of interested in what I feel like we haven't done anything as far as tutorials for especially post-processing of audio lately. We haven't done anything for lighting lately. I've been kind of focused on gear that's probably not as accessible to enthusiasts and hobbyists. So I feel like we probably need to get back to some less expensive things there, or more obtainable gear. And in fact, I have a microphone kit. I think I'd mentioned this before, and I've done some more work since we talked last. A wireless lavalier system from Azden. It's less than $200, and transmitter, the body pack receiver, and the lavalier microphone, and with another mobile device. So that looks kind of interesting. In my initial test so far, it's actually sounded pretty decent, surprisingly so, better than I expected. So that's looking pretty promising for those that maybe are looking for some sort of wireless lavalier solution in that range. More and more, again, as I work with more lavaliers, the more my opinion seems to be cemented that a lavalier should never be the first choice, despite all that talk we just had about lavalier microphones. So I just think it's so hard to get a usable production track from a lavalier mic that isn't, if you're hiding it. If it's worn outside, it's not so bad. It's usually completely doable. As soon as you try to hide it, things get pretty messy. So that's where I'm at in terms of my learning path and my efforts to learn new things. So again, in my corporate videos, whenever I can, I'm booming a mic. If I'm indoors, it's going to be a small diaphragm mic, a cardioid of some sort. And if I'm outdoors, a shotgun. So I'm sticking with that. It seems to be what works best in my work. And I hope that's helpful for you guys as well. I know a lot of people assume that, hey, a lavalier is really great because you don't have to have someone operating a boom, or you don't have to have a boom of any sort, even if it's a stationary boom, just like a mic stand that's holding it in place if you're doing a seated interview. But for me, it's worth the extra effort of bringing that stand and setting it up when I'm doing seated interviews, which again is a lot of what I'm doing for my type of work. So just some thoughts there. There's got to be ways to hide lavalier mics reliably. I just haven't figured out what they are yet. And every day I probably have some insights onto that. So I'm going to try and reach out to some of them and get some insights from them as well. The work with my friend Levi on the lighting course is, I've been sick this week. I'm getting over a cold here. So we didn't end up meeting again this week, but that's still in the works at some point. And then what I seem to be hearing is that there is some interest in a audio post-production course of some sort. So I'm working through that. And then probably what we'll do is a mini course, something that is fairly focused and fairly abbreviated, just very focused on dialogue. We'll probably just stick to Adobe Audition. I was actually playing around last night with Audacity, and I haven't touched Audacity for a long, long time. So it was kind of interesting to go back and take a look at it. It was the audio editing app that I used very first. And it's a surprisingly, for free, surprisingly capable, but it's missing some, what I would consider some really critical things. So if you're just publishing stuff to YouTube and you don't have the budget for anything else, totally get that you'd want to use Audacity. Got to keep those straight, Audacity versus Audition. And in fact, I think what I'll do is probably a tutorial here in the next few days, covering what you can do in Audacity, and kind of probably highlight some of its limitations as well. So it's not the perfect solution for everyone or everything, but there are some things you can do in it. And again, if your target distribution is going to be YouTube, and you don't have to necessarily hit loudness standards, then you could, that's what I'll talk about in that episode, is, what you can do. And that's the big limitation really with Audacity, is that with Audacity, you don't have a loudness meter. You don't have a true peak meter. So you're kind of crippled in a couple of ways there. So you don't have a way to get really consistent loudness across your different pieces, different video to video. And that's one of the biggest challenges. However, what you can do is you can compress and you can peak normalize. So that'll at least get your audio to a point where it's, at least in the right parking lot of the ballpark, so to speak. At least it's not totally out there in, completely off. But the problem is, again, you're still flying blind. So I think you'll see that illustrated. So based on the kind of the testing I was doing last night, I was just in Audacity. I did some compression, kind of, just by intuition, figuring, okay, I need to get somewhere in this realm, peak normalized from there, so to measure it to see what the loudness was over in Audition. And I was kind of, I got to about minus 24 on one attempt, minus 24 LUFS on one attempt, and minus 22 on a second attempt. So it's hard to really kind of nail it exactly where you need it. But again, if you don't have the budget for Creative Cloud, which I understand is, $50 a month US can be pretty steep if you're not bringing in money with the projects you're working on. So definitely something to look forward to if you're into that, and if that's a consideration for you. Also, I looked last night as well for the first time, kind of in earnest, a while back, I had downloaded and registered for and downloaded Avid's Pro Tools First. Now, if you're not familiar with Pro Tools, and most of you probably have heard of it, but Pro Tools is probably the industry standard digital audio workstation application out there. It was one of the first that really became popular. They've been around for a long time. It was sold to Avid. I don't remember exactly when, but Avid is also the company that makes the video editing application that is probably most popular in the high budget film arena. So they kind of own these two tools, Pro Tools and Avid Media Composer, and probably the industry standard for the high budget realm. But so they also now recently, I guess it was back in April, I remember at NAB, they announced, hey, we're going to have this free version to, kind of encourage people to check it out. And if it's the right thing for them, then maybe they'll upgrade to our full Pro Tools version. And so I downloaded it, registered for it, downloaded it, and in earnest looked at it last night. And I'm not quite seeing it. I feel like they made some compromises that doesn't make it a really useful evaluation tool. And here's what I mean specifically. So there are a few things you cannot do, and not that we necessarily need all of these things, but it doesn't have a loudness meter in it as far as I could tell. No true peak limiter. if you want to add any, it comes with a set of stock plugins, and they're very, very basic and straightforward. There's a compressor. You can normalize, peak normalize, I should say. But there's a basic EQ, very, very basic set of plugins. But if you want any other plugins, if you happen to own any others or you find any free ones, you can't plug them in here. You have to purchase them through the Avid marketplace, or so, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there's some sort of kind of online marketplace. You have to purchase them there. Also, if you are maybe collaborating with someone else and someone else sends you kind of a proper Pro Tools project, you can't open it in Pro Tools first. So I don't know, those limitations kind of strike me as they're not really committed to this whole concept of letting people try it, to kind of get them into the ecosystem. So I wasn't all that impressed. Also, last night was the night I first looked at it in earnest, but I had actually downloaded it probably a month ago, and it has this little app that runs on your computer and checks for updates and stuff. And it did one update probably a few days after I'd first installed it. And then after that, it didn't work until the next update came another week and a half later. So that wasn't very good. They need to get that process tightened up. And maybe that was just because Pro Tools First was still very new at that point. I don't know, but it was totally unusable, at least on my computer. When it got the next update, it fixed it. I don't know if that was just my experience or if other people experienced that as well, but that is what it is. Get this readjusted here. So something to consider there. What I'm saying by that is Pro Tools First is not coming highly recommended from me. Not that I hate it, but I think it needs some time, and I think Avid needs to kind of take a step back and think through, maybe we need to not cripple this thing quite so much. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more open. So I think it's going to be tough for anyone to really make a good evaluation with that. And then if you do end up investing in Pro Tools, it's an expensive piece of software. In fact, let's look it up. Let's see how much it costs. And there are two, it's kind of, the Pro Tools, I don't know, it's hard to tell here, but there are a lot of different versions. Here's an annual subscription is $300 for Pro Tools 12. If you get it on, you can still buy it evidently too, but I think it's like $1,200 or $1,400. it's an investment. And I don't know. Seems to me like Audition was working pretty well for me. The only issue I've ever really had with Audition is when I did receive an OMF file and I was doing mixing for a film, and I'm not an expert on that. I'm just getting started on that. So I'm not trying to set myself up as an expert on that. But what I would say is that I did have some issues with Audition crashing. I don't typically, normally if I'm just quickly doing some post on a dialogue track, no problem at all. It's always been rock solid. I'm on a Mac. I don't know if it's any different on a PC, but haven't had any issues until I started getting these massive multi-track projects. And this, I think, as I recall, this particular film had, and this is not an elaborate film by any means, but this one probably had, I'm gonna guess 24 tracks, something like that. So with a bunch of different Foley, dialogue, music, effects, and so on and so forth. So it did get a little crashy then, but that was a previous version. Haven't had that issue since. So we'll see how it goes. All right, let's just check in on our Q&A here and see if we have any questions that have been submitted. Doesn't look like we do. If you are watching this on YouTube, I would encourage you actually to go over to my Google Plus page where you can actually submit questions real time here. I'll be able to see those and we can address those. And if you're not sure where to find me, just go to plus.google.com, search for Curtis Judd, and you'll find this session over there. You can join there and add questions. if you've got them. All right, so there's some of my recent thoughts there. Excuse me just a second, again, getting over a cold, need a drink of water. I do have, as some of you probably know, I have an affiliate relationship with B&H Photo, and what that enables, one of the very generous things they offer to me as a result of that is that I can borrow gear. And in fact, the Sennheiser AVX review that I just finished, that was borrowed from B&H Photo, so that was really helpful. So I only have limited funds. I totally understand where you guys are coming from as well, or many of you. I don't have all the money to buy whatever I want, so it's nice to be able to borrow some of that gear from them. And the AVX was certainly no exception. So I'm not sure what I should look at next, what you guys are interested in. So it would be great to have your feedback. Certainly leave any comments down below if you're watching this later, if you're watching live. Go ahead and submit that through the Q&A area. Would love to know what it is you're looking for. So my thoughts are, some people have asked about looking at higher end gear, again, like sound devices, field mixer, 633, for example. I don't know if they'd let me borrow something like that. That's a little bit pricier. That's over $3,000. Usually I think $3,200 for the base kit on that. I can ask. I don't know what they'll say. I've never borrowed that much, but we'll definitely give it a try. And I'm curious about those as well, and kind of understanding those, what those really add. And I think there are definitely some things that they add, again, if you're shooting regularly, particularly if you're making money, which, again, I think we talked about this before, if I can go on that tangent. If you're struggling to afford gear and you're really passionate about filmmaking and audio production, be careful about, I totally understand there are cases when you want to do a passion project or you want to help out a friend, and I think that's good, and you should do that, and I've done that plenty of times myself. But there comes a time too when you need to, even if you don't charge a lot, you need your clients to get a little bit of skin in the game. And by that I mean, they need to be committed enough with money to be very serious about sound. Because I've had some experiences, and I think a lot of people have, that are kind of getting started there, where someone is hoping that you will just donate your time and your gear and your efforts. And again, there's a time and a place for that, but if they aren't committed enough to at least provide some resources, then they're not going to value what you could potentially bring to the project as much. So that's definitely something to consider. And that's why, I kind of recommend even $50 US or whatever works in your particular local currency. It's not a huge amount of money, but it shows commitment, and it kind of seals commitment from the client. And just something to consider. I'm not going to, I've done plenty of free jobs. I don't want to give the wrong impression. But I do think there's a time and a place to say, hey, I need to feed my family too. So just need a little bit of commitment here. And I think they'll find the finished product if they do commit as well. So, all right, let's, I see people kind of popping on and popping off, and I'm wondering if people are having trouble getting connected here. So I'm going to just kind of take a look over here at YouTube and see what's going on here. Got a viewer. I've seen this viewer popping on and popping off. And let's see what we got here. So in any case, if you are interested in any particular piece of gear, or more interestingly to me, I think, and I think to a lot of our audience here, if there's a skill you want to learn that I happen to know a little bit about, I'm happy to do a weekly episode on that, or another piece in the production sound course for that. But just let me know what that is. And again, I don't know everything there. Again, I had someone come to me just last night. I received an email from a wedding videographer, and she was asking if I could help clean up some audio. And there were probably some things I could do to it, but the trick is that this was the case I'd mentioned earlier. So it was a couple. He was wearing a lavalier microphone. I think it was probably hidden under his shirt. I'm not entirely sure. And then the woman was wearing a microphone as well. She had this really beautiful large braid of her hair, and the lavalier mic was hidden in the braid of hair. It just turned out that the sound from the braid mic just didn't pan out at all. It's just a noisy mess, and it was just beyond repair. So she asked, "Hey, is there anything you can do to clean this up?" And I'm going to take a look at it if she's willing to send it over to me, and let me take a look at it, maybe just like a 30 or 60-second clip, and see what we can do with that. I'm not confident that we could totally clean that up, but we might be able to give it a try. And I think the biggest thing that I noticed was the difference in level, of course, between the guy, because he's wearing the mic, and the woman. But that's where I think compression is probably not the best approach. And I think there's some other things that you would want to do instead, if there's some very obvious level differences between two people when they're recorded with a single microphone. And in that case, I think that's a worthwhile thing looking at. And I think in that case, what you want to do actually, instead of use a compressor, because a compressor only shrinks the waveforms from a certain point, the threshold and above. So what ends up happening is that when you do that, in this particular case, the guy's levels were here, the woman's levels were down here. If you use a compressor, it's going to kind of squash the peaks on him down. So he's going to sound very compressed, and she's going to sound normal. So there are other things you probably want to do in that case. And I think probably the first thing you'd want to do is, and as cumbersome and taxing as this sounds, probably one of the best things you could do in that case is to manually reduce the dialogue parts of the guy. And by that, I mean literally highlight his phrase and reduce the gain on it. So what that does is, instead of just reducing the peaks down to the threshold, it actually reduces the entire waveform and brings it in line with the other speaker, the other dialogue speaker. And it sounds much more natural. So that'll be the first thing we'll try, if she's willing to trust me with her audio on that. And then there were also some other things where there was some interference from his shirt, the capsule rubbing against and made some weird noises. So those will be tougher. Those can be eliminated effectively if they're maybe in between phrases, but if they're at the same time as dialogue, it gets a lot trickier to do that. But there are some things I do have, while Adobe Audition may have a harder time doing that, Isotope RX4, which I have, and actually RX5 just came out. I haven't upgraded yet, but that's another topic. RX4 has a spectral repair tool, so you could potentially actually remove the crackling. So we'll give it a try, see how it goes. But I think that's one tool, or one thing that I think people may be interested in learning about. I've done some of it, not a ton of it. So I'm not setting myself up as the world's foremost expert as that, but I can show you what I do know how to do, and hopefully that'll be helpful to you. So that's a topic there. What was the other topic? Oh yes, Isotope came out with a new version of RX4. In fact, let's show it to you. Sorry, it was RX4, now it's RX5. So let's go to isotope.com. Whoops, spell it correctly. And I'll share that here on the webcast. Screen share. There we go. You should see that come up here. And here it is, RX5. Sweet. In fact, let's go under here. Suite, learn more. Okay, so the suite is $1,299. Wow, so that's a little bit of a commitment there. That's a lot of money for a piece of software. And this is what it includes. So it includes the advanced audio editor, which I think is roughly the equivalent of RX4 Advanced. It includes RX Final Mix. So this is where you would do some mixing, which I don't think they had a product in this category before. I think that's a relatively new one. They also have this kind of standalone RX loudness control, which is kind of cool. It's not across the board. They actually announced this. They actually released a version back at NAB this year, April. And what this does is helps you to do the loudness normalization. So this is what helps you to get your sound consistent from video to video or piece to piece. So that's a pretty neat thing. The thing is, it actually plugs into Adobe Premiere, so you can actually apply it as you're rendering out your final video. So that's kind of cool. I'm not sure how well that works. Again, I haven't tested that. And then, of course, they also have Insight, which is a kind of just a metering tool, and it has all these different types of meters. It's pretty cool. I have a copy of that, the older version. Mine was a little crashy, but the information it did provide was interesting. And then along with that, you also get some passes to some Pro Sound Effects and Groove 3, which is training, online video training for audio. The problem and I think that's awesome. The problem with this Groove 3 is it's almost all focused on music production. And I think that's kind of one of the challenges. A lot of times they're focused very much on things that us filmmakers are, we have kind of a special case. We're looking for specific things instead of that. So it's on sale. It's normally going to be $1,500. It's on sale for $12.99. I realize that is a huge investment for someone who's not doing this professionally. And I think there's also even the upgrade. So I have RX4 Advanced. The promotional upgrade price is $600, and the regular price is going to be $700 for an upgrade. Wow. So it's a pricey piece of software, or it's several pieces of software in one. And I'm not sure. I'm kind of waiting to see. Well, I don't have much longer. Today is the 15th, so I only get through the 21st if I want to get that promotional pricing, but kind of wait and see what the early reviews say on that. I don't know I'm not convinced it's different enough from the version 4 that I have that I really need to upgrade. So anyway, that's that. We'll stop sharing that. Again, for those watching live here, if you have any questions and would like to ask those, all you need to do is, if you're watching on YouTube, you probably want to head over to Google+. So plus.google.com, search for Curtis Judd. On my profile page, you'll find this Google Hangout and can join there and submit your questions there. So would love to have you do that if you've got any questions. Right now, I'm just sort of babbling onto myself here. And for those that just joined, I apologize. My voice is a little raw. Just getting over a cold here. Let's see, other things to talk about. I think one thing that a lot of us kind of have to think about over time is as we're building out our kits, what are to your kit? And to be honest, I have, but I don't have, honest, that my microphone I have a $600 mic Technica 4, which is a decent mic, really in the industry considered a poor indoor dialogue mic. And by poor man's, I mean relative to a Schoeps CMC 641, which I'd love to have, but that's a $1,600 mic. Some great stuff, even with more modest gear. So, but there are some considerations. So as I continue to do new things, I think my next thing is I really need to get serious about a boom pole. I've just been using these mic stands, and that's great for seated people. But when I'm going to have to do the stand-up pieces, which I don't do a lot of, but I did actually do one recently and ended up having to use lavalier microphones instead, and the audio wasn't nearly as good as it could have been had I been booming a hypercardioid or a shotgun. So I think that's probably the top of my list. There is probably a boom pole next. Rode came out with a new carbon fiber boom pole. Looks kind of interesting. The thing that kind of didn't excite me all that much about it was that it's one, I think, where the cable comes straight out the end, and those are a little difficult to work with because actually it was not a wired pole. So if you were going to, you could actually take the top off and run a cable through the middle of it. But the problem is if you just put a straight cable through that, as soon as you start moving that boom pole around, you're going to hear that cable flopping around, and it's going to get picked up by the mic at the end of the boom pole. So I don't think that's a great solution, but I don't know, we'll see. I'm probably not going to put my money on that. If they send me one, I'll be happy to evaluate it, but probably not going to be my first choice. I did use the K-Tech KEG 150C, I think it was. And that has a coiled cable that goes through the middle. It has the cable comes out at the bottom of the pole at a 90-degree angle, which works really, really well, because what that means is, and I found this very quickly, in between takes, you can rest the pole on the ground or the floor. If the cable comes straight out the bottom, you can't do that. So kind of I don't know, maybe I'm being a little silly expecting something like that, but that's super helpful. I really like that. The carbon fiber was nice. I did notice that you could get handling noise until you get used to it. You have to be careful how you hold the pole. You don't want to have your hands sliding around on it while you're actually doing a take. It was nice and lightweight. It seemed very sturdy, very well built. So very happy with that. I'll probably end up with that one. The problem with that one, of course, is that it's a $600 boom pole, $600 piece of carbon fiber. But again, it looked like a pretty nice one. So, all right. Looks like we have our first question from Adam Terrell. Adam's question: are you familiar with RAW 4 Pro or Backup Champion? Adam, I have to confess, I am not familiar with either one of those, but let's take a look here. Let's open up the browser again. We'll share that. It's called RAW Pro. Let's see what that gets us. RAW video converter. Okay, so it takes raw DNG footage and JPEG time-lapse. Back up your entire source media with verification, then offload or convert your DNG or JPEG frame stacks to video with perfectly synchronized audio and proper time code. Interesting. So it looks like it's, so any camera that outputs DNG or JPEG stacks, this is all, yeah, sorry, Adam, not familiar with it, but it looks pretty interesting. If you are doing output from, oh, here, this is interesting. So what problems does RAW 4 Pro solve? So image stacks, whether that's going to be raw DNGs or JPEGs, they're hard to use once transferred to your computer. Editing can be a pain, blah, blah, blah. And then it also has Backup Champion. So that looks like a sort of an ingest tool of some sort. So when you're on the production environment, you got to ingest quickly and make some backups. It looks like that's what helps out. No, it looks interesting. Yeah, I have not heard of it, and I think that's mainly because I don't typically have that kind of workflow, but it looks like an interesting thing. No idea how much it costs. They have different licenses, it looks like. You can do a 3-day rental. Interesting. There's an academic version, a solo, or a duo. Not seeing prices here. Am I missing it? You can also do ProRes, Cineform RAW, DNX HD. I don't see anything you can click. Okay, yeah. Thank you for that, Adam. That's not something I'd seen before, but definitely something to keep in mind if I find myself in that situation. I think some of that can be done with some of the editing apps as well, although I could be wrong on that. I don't do a lot of time lapses, to be honest, so I haven't kind of gotten into that world yet. But very good. Thanks for that. Where were we? We were, oh yeah, gear. One thing that was, so boom pole, yeah, so I'll probably end up with that. Boom pole will probably be one of my next purchases. And I think that carbon fiber is really nice to work with. It just, holding a boom pole up for any period of time, it gets tiring surprisingly quickly, but except for those guys maybe that are doing a lot of weightlifting maybe. So in any case, that'll be one of my next purchases. And that's not, again, I think what I try to do is prioritize what's going to make a difference to the final product that I can deliver to my client. What's going to make a difference to the final video that I produce? And That's where I think money should be spent. And that's, if I can get up on this soapbox for a while, I guess. I find it interesting. I think a lot of people end up tossing all of their money at cameras and lenses, and then kind of view audio as either a second-rate citizen, or they just totally forget about it and then realize once they need to do something that has more than just camera tests out in some urban area where they're shooting all this beautiful footage, but then they realize, my audio is really bad and I can't just rely on this microphone that's built into my camera. So definitely you need to spend some money on audio gear as well. I think also on lighting gear. Again, if I were to break it up, I'd say you probably don't want to spend more than 1/3 of your total budget on cameras and lenses, 1/3 on audio gear, at least initially, and then 1/3 on lighting. The nice thing about lighting and audio gear is that they tend to last longer in terms of just their useful life, because now that LEDs are finally getting to the point where they've got the color dialed in a lot better than they used to. It's usable, I think. Investing in a good set of LEDs, if you're into LED. I think the LED Fresnels are starting to get there as well. They're just kind of expensive still. But I think investing 1/3 in your lighting, 1/3 in your audio gear. And again, the nice thing about audio gear, if you buy a really good mic, you can easily get 10 years out of a good microphone. And even on the recorders can last, easily for pros, I think you can easily get 5 years out of a recorder. And that's for someone who's using it a lot. Guaranteed that cameras are going to need to be upgraded, every 2 years. So, but that's kind of my general guideline. And so that's what I try to think of when I'm thinking about what my next gear is going to be, or what I need next. Really kind of trying to prioritize what is it that's going to make a difference in terms of what I can deliver in a video to my clients. And if you think about it in those terms, I think it's a little easier to make decisions about what to invest in next. Additionally, I think another thing that people don't invest in a lot is they'll go out, and I've seen this, not everybody does this, but I have seen some people do this, and I've been guilty of this myself, where they'll go out and buy an expensive piece of gear, assuming or hoping that will improve the production quality of their videos. And it may or may not, depends on what it is. But I actually think it's better to invest in a decent piece of gear and get to know it really, really well, and especially on the camera side. But also I think on the audio side as well. And that's where I haven't done the final review for my Zoom F8 field recorder yet. And the reason I haven't is I don't feel like I've invested enough time to really get to know it super, super well. Actually, I've had it for almost 2 months now, and I think I'm just starting to feel really comfortable with it and kind of starting to understand its limitations, understanding where to put things and how to set things up to make it work really well. And I think the same with cameras. Like these guys that upgrade cameras every 9 months or a year, I mean, maybe they're just really super gifted directors of photography, but I think there's something to be said for, or especially the guys that have, and I'm guilty of this. So I've got a Panasonic GH4 and a Nikon D750. And to be honest, I don't feel like I've ever really become proficient with the D750 from a video standpoint, because I've been investing, really my GH4 is the #1 camera I go to when it comes time to do video. So I finally, and I've had that camera for 1.5 years now, and I feel like I know how to operate it. I'm comfortable. So when I'm on the spot in the midst of a shoot, I know how to solve problems quickly with it. I know how to get the best out of it. And so there's definitely something to be said for that. If you're ever tempted to upgrade your camera because, oh my gosh, the Sony A7S II just came out, it's amazing, or the A7R II or whatever. I don't know. I kind of like the approach of, if you're really focused on making great video or great films, kind of get a camera, get really intimate with it in terms of understanding exactly how it works. And if you can do that, I think you'll be a lot happier, and you'll spend less time obsessing about gear I'm talking to myself here, just so everyone's aware. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody else. I just know how I operate. It's kind of a nerdy gear kind of guy. So that's something to consider. I'm also thinking that if I, when I do make my next microphone purchase, that I'll probably purchase something that I will have for decades, for a couple of decades at least, a good microphone that will probably be a pretty expensive microphone. And I haven't decided what that'll be just yet, but probably a Sheps on the, for an indoor dialogue, because I do that almost exclusively. I do so much of that relative to the other things. And, having a shotgun microphone would be really nice, but I don't do a ton of outdoor stuff, so it's not as useful for me. But those, again, just trying to kind of lay out to you guys some thought processes that may be helpful for you when it comes time to making decisions about where you need to go next. In terms of skills, that's where I think a lot of people don't invest a lot, or even not just skills. If you already are, feeling pretty competent with, both on the filming side and the audio production side and the post-production side, there's always something more to learn. I can guarantee you. I feel more adequate now as far as audio is concerned than I did even 2 years ago. So, and I've learned a ton since then, but I know there's so many things I don't know. And investing in, your skills, I think, is really, really worthwhile. And investing time in getting to understand how your different gear works is super helpful as well. So, all right, I feel like I'm preaching a little bit. Sorry about that. I think we're done with that for now. So as I mentioned earlier, I am probably looking at putting together kind of a very targeted dialogue audio post-processing course. And it will be probably less expensive than our first course was, because I think it's going to be very focused. It's going to be very to the point, not a lot of fluff, just pretty much here's some things that I do in terms of workflow. Here's some targets to aim for. Here's how you get to those targets, and things like that. So it's going to be pretty straightforward, and it's not going to be about, the thing with if you just say audio post processing for film and video, that can be so huge. I mean, there's mixing, there's mastering, there's all this other stuff, and mixing in itself is a dark art that I don't have a solid handle on just yet. I've done a little bit, but not a ton. So there's a ton to learn, and so I want to keep it very focused and very narrow, very simple. This is dialogue. These are some things to processing. Here's how you. We'll talk very specifically about compression. We'll talk very specifically about EQ, noise reduction, loudness. Those are probably the main things that we'll cover. And then also syncing it back up to your video. So workflow, ways to improve the workflow, but it will be that'll be pretty much it. So it's going to be very focused on dialogue audio, and which is an area where I feel like I have a little bit of better handle on things. So the trick is I just need to find the time to do that. So I'm going to start working on that. I've kind of outlined it a little bit, and I will start work on that in the next little bit. So hopefully before we get to the holiday season here, so before the end of the year, I guess, but hopefully we'll have something available there. All right. We have just 12 more minutes, it looks like. So again, for any of the viewers there, if you're not already over on the Google Hangouts page watching this, and you do want to ask a question, I invite you to go over there. That's over at plus.google.com. Just do a search for Curtis Judd. And on my profile page there, you'll find this Google Hangout. In that interface, there's a Q&A interface, and you can take a look at that and submit your questions there if you've got any. Okay. Other things to cover here. One of the things I mentioned earlier also, digital wireless lavalier system by Azden that we'll have a review coming up on in probably the next week or the week after. I also want to take a step back, and for those of us, again, on a pretty tight budget, I actually still think there's very much a case for, and I don't understand the psychology of all of this. So I find there are generally two people out there. For people that are focusing on trying to get decent audio, there are people that are kind of in the camp of, I absolutely refuse to sync audio. So I'm not going to record audio separate from my camera. And then there are people that are like, you know what, if it's good quality, I'm willing to do that. Obviously, I fit over here. I'm willing to do that. I don't find it onerous. I don't find it to be a problem. It's not a big deal. And for me, if I can really tune in the audio, I'd rather do that and spend a little bit more time. So the wireless solutions are probably better for those people in this camp that absolutely cannot stand syncing in post for whatever reason. But I do want to take a step back for those on this extraordinarily tight budget. One thing we've talked about a lot in the past is using, say, for example, a very small recorder like a Zoom H1 and just plugging a lavalier microphone into that. And that's a pretty decent solution. And it's a wireless lavalier solution. I mean, technically you have to sync that up in post, but it can be used very much like a wireless system in terms of your talent is not tethered to a camera. You don't have to have a boom operator. And I can't tell you how many people, people have written me notes and said, hey, I'm going to start a prank channel on YouTube. What's the best lavalier microphone out there? Well, I think what a lot of them are asking is what's a cheap solution that works? And if you're looking for cheap solutions that work, again, that's set up with a small voice recorder or small lavalier microphone is a pretty good solution. And for a long time, we've talked about the Zoom H1. I've had that recorder for several years now, but I also recently bought a Tascam DR05, which is a kind of a competitor on the Tascam side, and have been working with that one a little bit. I actually like the Tascam quite a bit more. And the reason I like it more is, it's a personal preference thing, but the reason I like it more is that, yes, while it is a little bit bigger than the Zoom H1, I don't find it a problem to put in the pocket. It has the input for the microphone on top of the unit. So that actually makes it easier to get into a pocket because now the cable's coming straight up out of the pocket. On the Zoom H1, it's on the side. So you have this, unless you have a 90-degree angled cable on your lavalier microphone, you've got the Zoom H1 with a cable coming out the side, and you've got to stick that in a pocket, and that's a little harder to do. So that's one thing. The second thing I really like about the Tascam DR05 is that it you can actually go into a menu and tell it that you're recording with a mono microphone. So if your microphone is not already sending the same signal to both channels, left and right, on the Tascam, you can say, you know what, just record this in mono because that's how I want it anyway. It's just dialogue. In dialogue, you record 99.9% of the time in mono. So, and they do that in the big budget films as well. They're recording mono dialogue, and then they mix it and make it stereo, or place it somewhere else off in the mix, and so on and so forth. So Tascam DR05 is coming together. I'm liking it so far, but we'll have a review on that one here in the next little bit as well. Another question here from Adam. Thanks for this, Adam. Have you tried Pluralize for syncing audio automatically? Yes, I have, and I have Pluralize. I don't typically use it, but I do have it. Let me explain why I don't use it. I think it's a great piece of software for someone that is really set against syncing up their audio. It's great. It's awesome. Takes some time, but it's very fast at syncing things up, and then you have to export the files before you take them into your editing. But it works pretty well. Here's where I'm still at in my workflow. I'm almost always shooting short pieces. By short pieces, I mean most of the pieces that I produce are 3 minutes or less, 5 minutes kind of on the high end or less for corporate video. So for me, a lot of times what I do is I bring in all the audio and all the video, and I do my sort of management there. I have my own scheme for how I number and name things, so I know which audio goes with which video. And then what I do is I actually process my audio first before I do my edit. Surprisingly, a lot of people do it after. I'm using, just so you're aware, also I'm using Final Cut Pro 10. I used to be a Premiere editor, and I still have Premiere. Still think it's a great piece of software. I know there are a lot of people that work with Premiere. I think that's great. But I'm on a Mac. I really like Final Cut Pro 10. Again, just a personal thing. I'm not trying to suggest everyone else should go out and use it, but I'm really happy with it. And what I like to do is actually edit my audio first and then sync them up. And I just do that in Final Cut Pro. It's very easy. But if you really are, again, if you find that to be onerous, and again, you're doing longer pieces, pluralize makes all kinds of sense. And I think last time I checked, it was about $200 for pluralize. I don't know if it's still that. Maybe it's less now. I don't know. But that's something if you really hate syncing your audio. And, or, again, if you're doing longer pieces, totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And if I'm doing a longer piece, I would probably go out. I actually have I think there are two versions. There's an express version and there's a full version. I have the express version. And I think that that came, I think when you bought a Road Link earlier this year, and maybe it's still going. I don't know if the promotion is still going, but if you bought a Road Link, you got a free version of Pluralize Express. So definitely something to consider. And I think it's a great piece of software. All right, where was I? Yeah, so workflow, I'm still kind of working things out. I do things, again, because I'm doing these short pieces, I kind of do a lot of things backwards. Just because it's been working well for me. So another example of something I do backwards, I actually do a lot of my, in terms of for the video itself, my coloring, I do that if I've got skin tones in a particular piece of footage, I'll do the coloring for that first in DaVinci Resolve before I do my edit. Now I realize that's totally backwards and people think that's a stupid workflow. And indeed it is a stupid workflow if you're doing a feature or anything that's probably longer than 10 or 15 minutes. Because if you're bringing in tons and tons of footage, you don't want to have to actually color all of that and then render it all out and then bring it into your editing app and take it from there. But again, because I'm doing short pieces, I'll almost always do the coloring first just because it's very straightforward and simple. And in fact, DaVinci Resolve now has all these editing features and it's actually looking pretty strong. I haven't played with it a ton, but when I have looked at it so far, it looks really, really good, impressive what they've done. Because I know on the version 11, the previous version, they touted, hey, now it's really an editor too. And I was like, no, not on my particular computer. It wasn't. I was using an iMac 5K and it was slow and jerky and didn't work well. Version 12, though, from what I've seen so far, works really, really well. So in a lot of ways, it works a lot like Premiere does. It doesn't have the magnetic timeline that Final Cut Pro 10 has, which I really like. But in any case, it seems like a pretty good editing app. And I think at this point, it's something that you could take seriously and actually do there. So that could even simplify my workflow even more there. I haven't tried syncing audio in DaVinci Resolve yet, but that's probably the next obvious step for me to take a look at. But yeah, so I color first. I only color things that have skin tones in them, really. If I just have some B-roll, I'll probably just cut pro. So my from that standpoint, again, because I'm doing short pieces and that works okay for me. But as soon as I start working on bigger pieces, I know it's all out the window. I'm going to have to go back and change it. And that's where I'm going to have to get serious about looking at other things. And I will confess, probably the first thing I'll look at is DaVinci Resolve as my new editing app. Because then I could do both the coloring and the editing in one app. And I just need to see how the audio sync works in there. And if it's as straightforward as it is in Final Cut and Premiere, then I think it's, for me, that probably makes more sense than Premiere. But again, I never want to suggest to anyone that there's a best way to do this. I think when you start coming to these kind of things, it's what works for you. So the nice thing is DaVinci Resolve, they don't call it Lite anymore, whatever they call it now. There's a free version. Anyone can download that. As long as you have a computer that's well enough equipped to run it, you can use that. And I would highly recommend you take a look at that. Final Cut Pro 10, if you're on a Mac, there's a 30-day evaluation that you can download and try it. I will say with Final Cut Pro 10, it works differently enough from the other editing apps out there. So if you've already done some editing and you're coming to Final Cut Pro 10, you have to give it a solid month of dedicated use before it really starts to click and make sense why, for example, that magnetic timeline is so helpful. So I would recommend that if you are going to try that. I think the Adobe apps have evaluation versions as well. I know they did in the past. I'm pretty sure they still do. So definitely try it out and see which one fits best for you. But if I was starting from nothing right now and I had no commitment one way or the other, I'd look at DaVinci I mean, what they've done with that piece of software is just absolutely amazing. And all the 12 for that. But once it'll take you a couple months to really kind of get in and understand how that thing works, and just at a basic level. And DaVinci Resolve is so dense that you can learn things on that for years and years and years. But really great app. So there's some thoughts there. Looks like we are out of time for this week. I'd like to thank those of you that submitted some insights and questions over here in our Q&A panel. Thanks for that. If you've got any questions, go ahead and leave those down in the comments below. Love to hear from you and take a shot at any questions you may have. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys again soon.